Good evening and welcome to this April 7, 2021 meeting of the Standing Committee of the Public Safety, it's the Standing Committee on Public Safety of the Brockton City Council. According to Section 2-91 of the Revised City Ordinances, this committee is tasked with considering all matters affecting the police and fire departments in the city, and in general, matters affecting the public health or safety of the community. This meeting is being held in accordance with Governor Charlie Baker's signed open meeting law order dated May 12, 2020, which relieves a public body from the requirement of Section 20 of Chapter 30A, that it conduct its meetings in a public place that is open and physically accessible to the public, provided that the public body makes provision to ensure public access to the deliberations of the public body for interested members of the public through adequate alternative means. The Public Safety Committee members, staff, and certain invited guests with matters on the agenda will attend tonight's meeting in person in the council chambers at Brockton City Hall. Out of respect for public health and in response to the governor's declared state of emergency, this meeting will be closed to the public, and interested parties can instead access the deliberations via a live stream at www.youtube.com/user/TheBrocktonChannels/live. Madam Clerk, why don't I introduce everyone? Okay, my name is Susan Nicastro. I represent Ward 4 on the Brockton City Council, and I also serve as the chair of this committee. The committee's clerk is Attorney Shannon Resnick, who also serves as the City Council Legislative Counsel. And tonight we have with us, to my left, Councilor at Large Moses Rodriguez, Ward 3 Councilor Dennis Anieri, and Councilor at Large Rita Mendez. Madam Clerk, the first matter.
Resolved to invite Brockton Fire Chief Michael Williams and the Brockton Police Chief Emmanuel Gomes and/or their designated representatives to appear before the Standing Committee on Public Safety to discuss the impacts of COVID-19 on their staff, the operations of their respective departments, and their work in the community, including without limitation operational changes the department embraced as a result of COVID-19 and future planning. Invited to attend Brockton Fire Chief Michael Williams or designated representative, Brockton Police Chief Emmanuel Gomes or designated representative.
Chief Williams, would you like to go first?
Good evening, members.
Good evening.
Did you have an idea which topic you wanted to start with?
Let's talk about training to cope with COVID impacts in the fire department.
Sure. So back in, I guess this really started in March of 2020, our main concern was protecting not only our firefighters but also the public. Because the virus was so strong and easy to pass along from one individual to another, we used personal protective equipment, and securing that in the beginning especially, even today. If we receive a call where there's a possibility that the caller or the person that we're responding for has any type of illness that would be related to COVID, we notify the firefighters ahead of time. So when they arrive on the scene, 2 firefighters will be coming completely encapsulated in PPE. That included a gown, gloves, masks, and shields for their face. We made some changes normally on let's say an EMS call, and it's a 3 or 4 man crew on the company that responded. All 3 or all 4 members would go into, whether it was a home or a business or whatever type of building they were going into, the whole crew would go in and assess the patient, help the ambulance company, get the patient on the stretcher, administer oxygen, whatever they would have to do. We drew back and only sent in 2. In some instances, the officer would be the only one to go in and assess real quickly what the situation was. Many times we're having our dispatchers ask the person if they could meet us outside to try and eliminate exposure inside of buildings. We continue to do that today. because COVID is still here, obviously. As far as the training goes, there was some training in the donning and doffing of the PPE, you know, how to safely be encapsulated, and then after the call, how to safely remove the PPE and put it in sanitary bags and to have it disposed of. So all that training was done back in March.
Okay. What about impacts on department operations in addition to what you've mentioned?
Well, obviously, like I said, it changed the way we operate a little bit.
Right.
In the beginning, I instituted a vehicle that carried extra PPE. So when a company was out, let's say an engine was out, they really only carried 2 sets of PPE for each firefighter. So if they went to calls right after the other, this vehicle that had all the extra PPE would respond right to that scene and get them the PPE to replace what they had already used so that there wasn't a delay. In other words, if they didn't have any more PPE, they would have to return to the station before they could be dispatched on another call.
Right.
So that eliminated that problem. It really helped out a lot. It also allowed that person assigned to that vehicle to travel to all the stations, make sure they had all the cleaners, masks, gloves, gowns, everything that they needed was carried on this vehicle, and it would travel the city on a 24/7 basis.
Wow.
I believe it was early summer that we discontinued that vehicle because its use wasn't as intense as in the beginning. But then came in the, it was around the first of the year where testing became prevalent, and we were doing our own testing. In communications with my department and the mayor, we reinstituted that vehicle, not only to assume the duties that they had before, but also now that was the person that was responsible for administering COVID tests. So again, on a 24/7 shift, if anyone was suspected of having an exposure or not feeling well, we could test them right at Central Station on Pleasant Street. And if, depending on the time of day, if a test was given before 4 p.m., we would have the results the very next morning. Anything after 4 p.m. might take later in the day on the next day, but very early on the morning of the next day, they were getting the results.
How many cases of COVID did the fire department and its, the firefighters as well as the staff experience?
So, as of today, and this goes back to our first case of COVID was on April 23rd of 2020. And since that time, we've had 39 cases of COVID. At this point, technically, I only have one person out today on COVID that tested positive. One other firefighter is still out on injury leave because he's developed complications with his lungs from having COVID. So the doctors are still trying to figure out his situation. So technically, he's not out on IOD COVID. He's out on IOD because of COVID.
Right.
And then, like I said, one other firefighter today is out that tested positive. All the other 37 firefighters have recovered, tested positive twice, and have returned to work.
Great. How many total employed in your department?
Right now, I think I'm at 198.
Wow. Do the limits of the current stations, and I'm thinking about Pleasant Street in particular, affect the ability to cope with COVID, like the socially distancing and all of that?
It does make it difficult. Like everyone in the beginning, we weren't open to the public because of the dangers, But since, we've developed barriers, let's say, like in the fire prevention office, there's plexiglass barriers to protect them. We had set up a system where we had a drop box at the fire prevention office, so early on in the beginning, we started letting people drop things off if they had to, and communicating a lot through telephone and email.
What have you learned that you would do differently today, if faced with this kind of a pandemic?
I guess there's a lot of lessons that have been learned.
Sure.
On many different levels. But again, it's all about protection, I believe.
That's right.
Yeah, so speed of response, let's say, we could work on things like that. But I think everyone in every walk of life has learned a lot in the past 13 months.
For sure.
Yeah.
Counselors?
Good evening, Chief.
Good evening.
You said that there were 39 cases that affected the men and women in the department.
Mm-hmm.
How is that compared to other departments, let's say of our same size, basically? Is it pretty much in line with what the other folks were?
I would have to say for size of department, yeah, most likely. I know some of where others were hit harder. There was 2 cases where we believe it actually went around a station. So if a group of, say on the east side, I have 2 companies, so there can be 7 or 8 firefighters there at one time. In one case, 6 out of the 7 tested positive. So it led us to believe that it probably somehow got in the station. That's another thing we did very early on was we tried to keep firefighters separated as much as possible. In other words, in the morning when it changes shift, you may have 14 or 15 firefighters in the kitchen, let's say, the shift leaving and the shift coming on, and all intermingling, talking, sitting at the same table. But we had to start a process where the offgoing shift would have to leave the building before the incoming shift could come in full protection as far as masks and gloves, and do a deep cleaning before they even started their shift. And we hope that we eliminated some of the passing along of the virus.
Sure.
Again, it was a lot of sanitizing, wiping things down with say, cleaners. Obviously, we went to a mask policy, even in the stations. If you were, the only time they could remove them was when they were eating, and we didn't have anybody within 6 feet of each other when they were eating. A lot of little internal processes were put into place. We did the best we could. Again, 39 members. It's very, very hard to tell exactly where someone contracted it. In some cases, like I said, it's suspected that it was passed around the station between members. And then there was another case of that at another 2-piece station down in Campello. But you can never be sure. You know.
That's right.
The thing that we tried to concentrate on is the firefighters were in situations where they were going on multiple calls a day where there was suspected COVID involved. We didn't want them bringing that home to their families. So we urged them to change clothes before they left. Don't go home in your work uniform, change into clean clothes before you go home. Wash up and sanitize your cells before you get back into your own home. And a lot of the guys did very well with that. So we just urged to be as safe as possible.
What about now that we're into the vaccination, how's that coming along in the department as far as how many members?
To be honest with you, Counselor, maybe not quite as well as I had hoped. We vaccinated 68% of that 198. For some, whether it be a medical reason or a personal preference, some just chose not to receive the vaccine, and we can't force them to do that.
So you've gotten about 68% anyways.
68%, yeah.
That's a decent number.
It's
I mean,
decent.
When you sit down and think about it. I mean,
Right.
I don't know if you saw it or not, but I got vaccinated months ago because I was doing some work with some nursing homes here in the city. And they were having, I got involved because only 37% of their staff had actually agreed to get vaccinated. And that's why they wanted somebody from the community to come in and talk to the folks about the need to get vaccinated and stuff. They've done much, much better since, but they were only at 37%. So if you're at 68%, you know, you're doing better than the average. And I think you're pretty close to herd immunity anyway. So that's basically what we're looking at. So,
and like I said, we weren't in a position where we could force anyone to get it, but we strongly advised, especially with the situations that the people were being put in, you know, to be responding to where there's a known COVID case. I mean, why wouldn't you want to be extra protected? But again,
do you find that it's the older guys or the younger guys that are anti-vaccine? Or is it mixed?
It was a mix. Yeah. To be honest, some, you know, talking amongst themselves, they formed opinions And in one situation, it was a whole group that worked together, that for some reason, must have talked about it sitting around the coffee table and just decided that they weren't getting it.
Yeah.
Nothing we could do.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Dennis?
No, I'm set. I'm fine.
Rita?
Hi,
Good evening, Council.
good evening. So is everyone who wants to take the vaccine, is the vaccine available to all firefighters?
Yes,
If they choose
police
to?
and fire were in the first phase. I believe that started, Chief, was that January or February that we started, got our first vaccine? January. Yeah, because I know we set it up, and it was like a week that police and fire were going to, it was when we began doing it at the Red Building at the high school. And because I know I got my second shot the first week of February, so it must have been a month. Yeah, it must have been January.
Are the same requirements still when you have to go to the homes to use the full PPE? Is that still required?
Still is, yeah. Again, like I mentioned before, it starts with the dispatch, so there's a series of questions that are asked of the caller, do you have a fever? Have you been feeling sick at all today? And then, again, as I mentioned, we urged everyone to try and meet us outside. That was done, and that's still done today. If there's criteria there that there's a possibility that there could be COVID involved, there's a couple series of questions that, and things we try and do just to keep our people more safe.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Chief.
You're
I'm
welcome.
going to ask Chief Gomes, unless there's something else you'd like to add.
No, not
you.
until
That
we
was-
move on to the next topic.
Very informative.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening.
Good evening, councilors.
Thank you for being here.
My honor. Councilors, if I can just address this concern about how your police department operated during these COVID times. As you know, you've heard me say it before, that the Brockton Police Department is a full-service police department, which means if you call us, we come out. Even if it's not a police matter, we will go to the scene and try to facilitate and assist you in any way possible. That's being a full-service police department. And the challenge during this year of the constant moving target that is COVID-19, the challenges for us was to continue to provide those kinds of services for people in Brockton, and also to keep our own department safe. So from early on, we had to take a lot into considerations. I do want, as you councilors know, that we're the only city agency that's open 24 hours a day that brings people back to our house, okay? By the nature of the way we operate, okay? And we have to house people, we have to feed them, we have to take care of their medical needs. And that was a concern. And even during COVID times, there have been a considerable amount of arrests. We're also dealing with some aspects of the law that there are mandated arrests, so it's not even allowable for us to even dig down. So we had to address the logistics of how to operate without exposing our officers. And we also, like the fire department, our officers go out into the field. We did have a busy year. As you know, the police department, handles well over 100,000 calls for service a year, and those are all mostly on-site. We go to a scene, but we also have a large walk-in traffic into our lobby for a number of needs. As you know, we provide everything from firearms to passport assistance, wreckage bureau, a number of that. So there is ongoing hand-to-hand contact with the public every day that we have to, so we had to protect our building. We limited our exposure in the lobby. We closed some of those hours off. And also, these logistics that I'm pointing out to you are things that don't always come to mind, but keep in mind, we have a department that changes up every 8 hours, and we have a fleet that changes hands every 8 hours, and we don't have all the equipment to assign specific equipment to every single officer. Such things such as patrol rifles, you've heard of tasers, sometimes even portable radios. Those things may get passed on every 8 hours. So we have to devise a system where our cruisers get cleaned and wiped down in between each shift. We took it down to one-man cars instead of 2-officer vehicles. One thing we also did in-house is we started a spreadsheet very quickly, and we were doing contact tracing before it was even a term. We wanted to know where our officers were possibly becoming contaminated. During this time, and I'm happy to report that in the last 4 weeks, we did not have a positive case, but throughout the entire year, we've had 48 positive cases in the Brockton Police Department, and we've also had well over 120 exposures. I didn't mention that earlier, but the exposures is something that we also have to deal with. I couldn't allow someone who's been exposed to COVID to come to work and possibly contaminate. And since the shifts are always one right after another, contamination would be, and we're centrally located. I even omitted outside agencies for any reason, federal agencies, state police, from coming into our house. We had to lock it down that way because I could not assure that my officers would not become contaminated by like an FBI agent or a state trooper that would be visiting. So we did that. And I'm happy to tell you that we maintained the calls for service, which actually went up. And even though we're still in the COVID terms right now, I'm expecting, we're on track for 2021 to be the highest number of calls for service this department's ever had. So when people have the presumption that people have been locked down and there's been less things, that's not necessarily true. A lot of criminals didn't take the year off. They continue on their way, and we're still dealing with that. But I'm very happy with some of the things that we've done. We've also brought in, I failed to mention that we've brought in outside agencies to also fumigate and routinely take care of any public access places in the department. And we also had outside contractor that came in and detailed our cruisers. I shouldn't use the word detailed, but decontaminated them and with wiping down the vehicles and everything, because they change hands every 8 hours. So we were able to do that, and that's where we stand today. We continue to operate that way. We have allowed outside agencies to come in. We have expanded lobby hours to full hours, and we've also, as you know, we do a lot of programs. We have to curtail the programs, but some of the programs have gone back. I've assigned the officers back to the middle schools. Some of the grants, a lot of the grants, as you know, because you've heard all about them, it requires us to go to personal homes and meet with people or do curfew checks, things of that nature. Obviously, during COVID, that was flying in the face of what we're trying to do. So a lot of those grants and a lot of those operations were put on hold. They're all back. They're all back on an operational basis, still with all the safety precautions in place. And the other thing that we've done with councilors during this COVID thing, we have placed safety items in the cruisers such as gloves and primarily masks, and we issue those to the public when we see them without masks. Okay, rather than become confrontational, we offer free masks to anybody we run across. Some of our people in our community that could need them most, we provide that without being confrontational, and that has been well received. If you have any questions.
What kind of training have you given your officers and your staff, Chief?
Well, the COVID training, we always had to adopt. We mentioned that this has been a constant moving thing. Don't forget, we're operating day to day with updated news about safety precautions. We're dealing with what's coming out of the White House, the State House, CDC, and everybody else. And sometimes that information is not parallel. So we try to stay with all of the CDC guidelines and whatever's mandated. And our training with the officers was it started primarily with be candid with us. Let us know if you're feeling ill. I didn't want officers to not tell us and not tell us where they got it. It was very important for us. And the department did a lot to help these officers not only get treatment, but remember originally it was one negative test was not enough to come back. You had to have a second. So I set up Lieutenant Schliemann, who handles some of that. In fact, Lieutenant Schliemann sitting out there happens to be your officer here tonight. And he negotiated a plan that it was all about being candid and being honest. And he saw that the officers were scheduled for all their appointments, and they could report to him on a 24-hour basis, and we would make adjustments on the shifts. We had to do this on the fly because we could not, if someone was sick, we could not afford them to even come into the building. So, and we provided as much as we could. There was no cost spared for PPE. We had plenty of, we bought special sinks, everything, and we put it all out through the station. And it was an issue of getting out as much education as we could to the officers. For example, we stopped doing roll calls, okay? Things like that where officers were together, everything was on the fly. So we provided to them as much as we could medically and protected them as best as we could, still with the balance of staying a full-service police department.
Chief, do you think the limits of your current station affected your ability of your department and your staff to cope with COVID?
Well, I know there's a big thing underway to get us a new station. That station is a hindrance even without COVID.
Yeah.
I can tell you, I come on to the police department in 1986, and we have transformed every closet into an office. We have outgrown that. That was built in the late 60s, and I think they'd outgrown it by the time they occupied it. It's not feasible. I don't find that it's community friendly. It's a fortress. There's no parking. It's hard for people to get there and get the service that we want to provide with them. And because we are centrally located, there's only one building that we operate out of that. It created a lot of hindrances for us. If you've ever been on our lobby, it's been hard for us to work during these COVID times because the lobby is very small. Everything from social distancing. Also, that's also happened in the last year or so. There's been an unusual request for the number of pistol permits. An awful lot. We have record requests for license to carry and pistol permits. And each one of these requires an appointment to the police station and the lobby. So we had to try and schedule that with people showing up in the lobby for services. Our lobby and what we need to do there in our records bureau. It really, as hard as they try, we find it very hard to adequately service our community.
Right, can imagine. As a result of COVID, do you think you made fewer traffic stops or you entered fewer homes and that kind of thing as part of the daily work of your officers?
Yes, we did. We also prepared our officers to minimize their contact with the public when it was not necessary. I mentioned we stayed a full-service police department. We didn't allow officers to go in people's houses. Obviously, if it's exigency, some kind of exigency or a medical requirement or they're first on the scene, obviously the officers are going to do their jobs and perform that duty. But there were less, we made less arrests. We also made less arrests of people that we suspected were COVID positive because we would summons them to court and we would not bring them back to our house. But also throughout the course of the year, I want you to know that there were times we suspected someone was COVID positive, but because it was a statutory mandatory arrest, we had to do what we had to do statutorily.
And of the 48 that you said got sick, does that include officers and staff, or just officers?
That's sworn personnel.
Okay. What about your staff?
We have about 25 civilian staff in the building. I don't know of any staff that got it at work or work-related issues, and I don't remember any staff that was out. Now, we had a lot of civilian staff that we kept out for quarantine or because they might have had possible exposure, let's say, in their family side, and we kept them from coming in. But what I'm speaking to you, that is sworn personnel that were out, answering calls and going to individual addresses.
Okay. Colleagues?
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. First off, I do want to thank Chief Williams for his presentation and everything that his department has done during this whole process of the COVID-19, and definitely, I'm sure everybody within the city of Brockton's seen just what your department, as well as what the police department has done, is still doing. I think it's I think it's great that both public safety and all public safety people are working together in regards to what we've been faced with, because it has not been an easy task. I guess what I'm going to probably swing to is now the fact that here we are on April the 5th, and we're about 3 weeks away from spring vacation, and probably about 3 weeks away from the temperature that's 66 today will be 89 degrees in 3 weeks. And you know where I'm going with it, because the next thing you know, we're going to be having the same task that we had last year, midsummer, early fall, but earlier, per se, where our young students are going to want to be running around and doing what they want to do because they can. And unfortunately, and I was talking to the chief this evening, Chief Williams, and I had mentioned, we were talking about just on the news this evening, and how the biggest issue now is, the infection that's, starting to hit the kindergarten and 16-year-old students, K to 16, which leaves me in some wonders of what could be, and I think we all have to start to think about that. I would think that I'm sure the mayor is and his staff, and I'm sure the school department is and their staff as well, because the next thing you know, we could have a couple cases that break out, and then, kindergarten could be sent off, and we'll see in September. And that's the concern I have, with this virus. And I guess my biggest concern is, are we preparing ourselves? And I'm sure we are. I'm sure both of you are, no doubt. I would think we all would be, because it's not seen in the light of day that this is just going to be done. It's gone, I've been vaccinated, and a lot of you were. I mean, it was our age level, and I went and did my thing because I wanted to. I've had shots. I had pneumonia shots. I just had a cortisone shot a week ago here. I'm getting a lot of shots, to be truthful with you. I'm getting shot up. No, nothing. No, don't take that to heart now, Chief. But I'm just saying. I think I just want us to. I mean, can you give me some insights? I mean, you are starting, I'm sure you are, Chief, looking ahead to what could be, again, basketball, baseball, fields, courts, no masks, doing what they want, you know what I mean? And it's not going to help what we got going on. That's my concern, That's just
Right.
how I feel.
There already starts to become some confusion, because now that the weather is getting better, the parks are being used more.
Right.
We're devising a plan. We actually have a plan that we're going to put in place on how to address, in a tighter fashion, the loud house parties, which are parallel to the disturbances that we saw at some of the playgrounds last year. Not in defense of anybody, but last year, people weren't allowed to leave the state. Right. They were afraid to travel, so they did seek out their local parks as close to their house as possible. It's the only, again, in defense of them, some of our citizens we were compassionate about it because that was really the only social life they had throughout what was a rather warm summer. So we were, we exercised some empathy, but sometimes enough is enough, as they say. So we have that. So, and the house parties became a problem. Some of these things are cyclical, and they come with the good weather. We know that. So we have some things in place to get out right in front of that, because we expect the same this year. And the, in fact, even this morning, I had a brief conversation at a department head meeting. There was a mention about with Tim Carpenter in the parks, and we've already started having issues last week. So we're on it, and we intend to address them in short order.
Exactly, yeah. And you mentioned that because the park up on West Chestnut Street isn't really complete yet, because we got hung up with the culvert 19 and it hadn't been finished up, but the basketball court area is, and there's already people that I noticed that were there today when I went by, you know, 8 or 9 cars. It usually goes from 1 to 2 cars to 8 or 9 cars, and when you get 10 to 15, then you know. And a lot of the people that play basketball up there, believe it or not, some people that come from Bridgewater, because West Bridgewater doesn't have a court like that. I mean, knock on wood, we never have trouble up there, but still, it does become that issue. So I'm just, and you're getting back to the early parties. At least we have some other things in place this year for the police department to work with the ordinance that we just did. The council did, I think, is a plus. You know, no doubt we'll be looking, you know, to utilize that in its first stand. But again, I just have that concern. I know we all do. I just want to make sure we're just, you know, on top of it. And I know that we are, but, you know, it's going to happen. We know that. We know it's going to be a little bit of a repeat, and we're just going to have to deal with it. Hopefully it'll be the end of it too, you know. Let's hope. Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Chair.
Councilor Rodriguez.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Chief, the question that I asked the fire chief is the same question I'm going to ask you in terms of the number of your folks that are vaccinated, or at least have taken at least one of the vaccines.
We're, as of today, we're probably somewhere around the 75 percentile, and we urged everyone in our building to get it. I do agree with the fire chief that we had a little bit of a slow start, some apprehension, right? That's to be said, but once it started moving and people saw that, you know, there was, you know, everybody heard more and more media things about it, that it just appeared to play safer and safer all the time. I can take people's apprehensions, but we're running at about 75%, just plus that, across the board with our civilian. We offered it to all our civilian staff as well. So that's where we're at right now.
And Chief, you mentioned that you basically run the issue of swapping equipment around, cars,
Yes.
Radios in some instances, or even the rifle that you guys use.
Yes.
In your, how many cruisers do you, functioning cruisers do you have right now, at least for patrol?
Well, we have what I call a Frontline Fleet. These are marked cars. We have a Frontline Fleet. We have support vehicles, you know, like a transport van. And one thing that I failed to mention is we moving all our prisoners using one vehicle, if possible, or a secondary, to keep a vehicle from being, because once a vehicle got contaminated by someone not in our department, we would take that cruiser out of commission until it was cleaned the following day. So we use the van a lot. So Frontline are our marked cruisers. We also have a secondary fleet, some of the older vehicles that we keep as backup. We have approximately 30 marked vehicles in our fleet, and that's not counting the, you know, we have like a pickup truck, we have a couple of vans, things like that. We have, I believe, 4 motorcycles right now, but out of that Frontline Fleet that I was mentioning, Councilor, those cars are not take home, they're not assigned to any one person. The keys literally get exchanged every 8-hour shift.
Right.
So we had to be wary of cleaning that vehicle and before the next person got into it for 8 hours and did his reports in there and did his shift in there, in and out of the car kind of thing. And that's what the difficult part. And all of that equipment that you just mentioned, all that would get passed along. So we also wanted to make sure that, for lack of a better term, we had contact tracing through the fleet, through the equipment to monitor that.
And to be blunt with you and ask you, point blank, how many cruisers do you think you could use? I mean, if let's say I came in and I said money is no object, how many cars would you say this is where I'd like to be in terms of cars for the department, at least the marked cruisers for the department?
This comes up every year. Anyone would always like newer vehicles or more vehicles. That's kind of a given. But what we've been trying to do is update the fleet, because it's not a cost-effective to have cruisers outside of warranty anymore. And that's why when I talk about the primary fleet and the secondary fleet, it's that I am in a process of trying very hard to update the fleet. Out of that, it's not so much the number of the cars. I'd like to...
Good running cars.
I'd like to have more of those frontline cruisers be newer and be under warranty. Huge cost savings in repairs. Nothing is cheap these days. I mean, an engine is $5,000–6,000. Transmissions of $3,000–4,000–5,000.
But I'm saying a department of your size, would you say 50 cruisers would be, 50 patrolling cruisers would be?
We could safely take an increase of like 15%.
So around 50
right,
cars, functioning cars.
That would make all of our frontline cars under warranty, cost effective, and it's also safety issues. And then we could take cars that fall out of warranty and have them as more administrative cars, so we get the full life out of that vehicle.
And what about radios?
Radios, it's been before you, with your support. We're in a position that I'm hoping real soon that everyone in the academy and everyone in the department will have an updated, through grants, everyone will have their own radio, even the officers in the academy coming out of the academy now, and we plan on having a bank of extra ones in case, which allows for any breakage or some that are not serviceable. So we should be okay with those through grants and through your assistance real soon.
And what about the rifle and some of the other things that so you figure if you have 50 cars, you should have at least 50 of those? Is that what you're saying, or? And the reason why I'm asking you
Right.
this is that we actually have some things in the works.
Right.
That we're looking to help the department out with some of these things, and that's why I'm asking you this.
Well, I appreciated that, and I try not to act like I'm a kid at the mall asking Santa for everything. I'm trying to, and one thing that we probably have the most use for, and I really going to be pursuing that, is I'd like to have more assets to furnish the officers with more tasers. Tasers have helped us. It's another tool that we can use before we even get to any kind of lethal issues. Now, clearly the patrol rifles, there's a need, but that is for the worst of worst situations.
No, the reason why I'm asking...
more often have a need.
The reason why I'm asking is so that, to kind of cut down on the passing of the things around from officers to officers. That's why
Right.
I'm bringing that up.
Right. Right now, we're operating at about, we're putting out, let's say, 10 vehicles minimum on patrol on the shift. So we make sure that we have at least one patrol rifle that's available, and the officers can only take it if they're trained.
Okay.
Could I use more? Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Because sometimes they're broken or they're out of commission, and we don't have adequate numbers. And again, getting back to the tasers, through a grant, we have picked up some more. But my ideal goal that I'd like to see us hopefully somewhere on a horizon is that I can issue every officer his or own taser to have for their safety and the safety of others. We're dealing with a lot more issues today, especially mental health issues, that we run into great situations where we never want to bring it to a lethal situation. And we also don't want to get our officers hurt. Just to give you an example, the other day we had a teenager with some issues, some psychological issues. and in trying to help them, he hurt not one, not two, but three officers in one shot. And that's a great loss for us. And it's because we didn't have some of the things to bring about controlling him. So we lost three officers, one of them for over a month with some injuries. So these injuries rack up. We always talk about injuries. Nobody ever asked about the injuries to the police officers, you know? And, but those are some of the things that would be an asset, Council.
All right, thank you. And we're going to do what we can to make sure that stuff gets resolved.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilor Mendez.
Thank you so much for giving all that information. And I know that this whole pandemic has been hard on everyone, but especially to the frontline workers who had to really be there and having to deal with the residents and the public, and then going through all the emotional and psychological, just like how you mentioned with the teenager. And I was going to ask you, even though you stated that you try to do less arrests and less stops just to prevent all the number of people at the stations, but I'm presuming that people being stuck in the homes, that the higher intake of drugs and alcohol is leading to, domestic violence situations. Any like special trainings that the police had to go through in order just to deal with that, just how you're mentioning with the teenager, this whole psychological aspect of going through a pandemic and also being stuck in a home, as opposed to in regular days we'll be working all day and getting home at night. So how did that really change the whole?
Well, there's a multitude of things. First, Council, you know from your job that domestic violence issues were clearly on the rise, For motor vehicle offenses, we still had pretty close to the same number of car accidents. With a lot less people driving last year, we had close to the same number of car accidents. But domestic violence, not to just pinpoint on that, but a lot more calls on that, officers getting involved and more issues with that. And as you know, those are mandated arrests.
Yeah.
And those are mandated procedures that ties up cruisers for a long time. I also suspect that in trying to help people with psychological issues, I think throughout the year they had a problem getting in to see their doctor. Maybe they had an issue with medication, and I think some of that played a role in it. I can't put the entire blame on it. I think there was some situational stuff that made the situation worse, and then we got involved, and now I saw that as a big factor.
Yeah. Thank you for all you guys do. It's been a very difficult year. Hopefully, we'll see better days coming.
Thank you, Council.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Gomes. Can I have a motion?
Motion to recommend favorably
Second.
to the entire city council.
Thank you.
Second.
All in favor? Thank you. That was all of us, Shannon. Okay.
Madam Chair,
Madam Clerk, oh, excuse me, yes?
just before we begin, I want to make sure we thank our custodian over there because he brought us a fresh decanter of water, since the other one's been there since last year.
Oh,
I had
thank you
him,
for the fresh water.
fresh water.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Matthias.
Number 2, resolved to invite Brockton Fire Chief Michael Williams and Brockton Police Chief Emmanuel Gomes and/or their designated representatives to appear before the Standing Committee on Public Safety to discuss the impacts of sales of marijuana for medicinal and recreational use on the community work of their respective departments, including without limitation, educating staff on applicable laws and regulations and the enforcement thereof, and future planning for the impacts of delivery of marijuana and social consumption in the city of Brockton. Invited to attend, Police Fire Chief Michael Williams or designated representative, Brockton Police Chief Emmanuel Gomes or designated representative.
Chief Williams? Thank you.
Councilors, on this topic, I actually had a handout produced for each one of you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
So as far as marijuana overall, a lot of the aspects of this are regulated by my Fire Prevention Bureau, and that would be obviously Deputy Chief Williams. He actually is the one that helped me prepare this document. So going through it, a lot of this is the actual state laws that we have to abide by. Regulations, the Cannabis Control Commission regulates almost every aspect of, let's say, the grow, the sale and distribution of marijuana within the city. And a lot of the aspects have to do with permitting. So my Fire Prevention Bureau is responsible for a lot of that. As you know, we have 11 dispensary licenses available here in the city. I believe they're all spoken for. The one in question, I believe, is on, and maybe Council Yaneri, you can help me on this, the one on the corner of West Chestnut and Manley.
Right, he's medical and recreational. That's the one that's open and doing business, and the other one that just opened is the one on Pleasant Street.
Right.
The others, we
Right.
still have the licenses, we still have other licenses that we're gonna be dealing with over the next few weeks with the
Yeah.
special, yeah. But, yeah, he
Okay,
is opening, and, he does a tremendous business, to be truthful with you,
thank you. Yes.
with no problems at all.
Again, so it's a lot of aspects of the storage, the amounts that they can have on their premises. There's very strict regulations of how it has to be stored during off hours when nobody's there, and that includes the protection of, let's say, product being damaged in a fire. Okay, so it has to be in a secure, almost like a vault that, God forbid, there's some emergency of fire, that the product is not going to be involved. Again, you mentioned, Council, there's two different types. There's obviously medical and recreational. There's really no difference to us as far as the fire department goes.
Right.
What we're getting into now is a lot of these growing facilities. There's, I think, one or two proposed for the city, one up in the village, I know is being talked about. So there's some different aspects to look at, whether it's a sales property or a growing property. Again, has a lot to do, especially with the lighting. You know, these greenhouses that they use, the lighting uses a lot of electricity. Everything is regulated along those lines, and the proper safety applications are always put in place as well. Getting into the use, I guess, of the product, if you want to talk about that, we look at it as maybe an uptick in calls because, for instance, there's a building in the city that the owner rents out to musical bands, and not to sound stereotypical, but a lot young people in that, you do that as a hobby, tend to like to use marijuana. It affects the fire alarm systems, whether it's setting off the smoke detectors. And the situation I'm speaking of, we had to work with the owner to try and curtail either where they were going to be using, or, you know, they couldn't be doing it in a hall in groups of 3 or 4 people, because that amount of smoke generated caused the fire alarm systems to go off. So we're working with, let's say, that building owner, and he was very, very cooperative to help alleviate that problem. Again, it can be looked at along the lines of cigarette smoking, has a lot of the same aspects as far as the safety goes. I guess you wouldn't see a careless disposal of a cigarette butt as opposed to a marijuana cigarette, but it's still, the possibility is still there, you know, a ash dropping or what have you. You know, there's safety to be considered. In responding to emergencies, that, you know, some of the aspects of marijuana are looked at the same way that we look at alcohol. You know, if someone is either intoxicated or impaired, and I'm sure Chief Gomes can speak along these lines better than I, but the laws, I believe, have a lot to run parallel a lot with each other. In speaking with Deputy Williams, we had a fatal car accident at Belmont and Pearl Streets back in the fall, and the investigation said there was a possibility that marijuana could have been involved. Again, I don't want to speak out of school,
Right.
but so there are situations that are similar. There may be a situation with somebody who's intoxicated or impaired because of marijuana, let's say. I'm not a doctor or a scientist, so I can't really decipher what the impairment compared to one another is, but that is also something that we have to take into consideration. Possibility of more EMS calls due to issues with the use of marijuana, let's say. I haven't particularly noticed an uptick overall, but statistics may tell differently down the road. That's kind of an overview of the way the fire department looks at this, whether it's medical or recreational. A lot of the aspects we take in, the legalities of it.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Colleagues, how about Councillor Mendez?
Go ahead. You want to go first?
Anything? Okay, Councillor Neary.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just in brief, Chief, how many, what's really the percentage of the fire department seeing today where people are still operating their grow rooms, or you've been called for a fire and found that was the...
We have not had a single incident in either a establishment or a grow room. I believe there's only 2 growing facilities that have been presented or talked about
Right.
this time. But
But-
at this point, we haven't had any problems.
No, and no problems even at any home?
None. In fact, I can almost even vouch for the several that I've looked at. They're some of the most secure facilities in the city as far as
Yeah.
security and safety.
Was it ever a strong percentage, though, over the years?
I'm sorry, Councilor?
Was it a strong percentage of grow rooms where people were doing it at home in their residential area?
I'm sorry, residentially.
Yes, I'm sorry. Maybe
Occasionally we
I
do
might
come
not have been
across
clear.
that.
I'm sorry, yeah.
Yeah.
But do you still,
there hasn't been many issues, or I think one of them, the instance was an instance that Deputy Williams spoke of where it was a garage fire, and we found, let's say, this home
Okay.
grow area,
right,
but it wasn't technically the cause of the fire, we don't believe.
and I'm sure, like you just said, I mean, yeah, no doubt that when there's an automobile accident and, people sometimes the first responder to be there, I'm sure, like you say, they can recognize the situation to what the driver may have been, how he was intoxicated or whatever. You can detect that before others have got there to say that could be the cause. There's no doubt about that. But I mean, I find this mostly to be just incomprehensive to what the Cannabis Committee and all was looking for when we accepted, recreational marijuana or medical marijuana, to be truthful with you. I mean, I was accused of bringing medical marijuana to Ward 3, but 77% of the voters of the city of Brockton wanted it, and 72% of the people that live in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts voted for it.
Right.
Same with recreational. I mean, it is what it is. I mean, there's nothing you're going to do. It's never going to go away. It's here. It's
Right.
here. And just as I say, with what we've been dealing with, and Councilor Rodriguez knows, because we both were dealing with it when it came into effect, we're putting everything together, pieces together, to make sure it was being done in the most safe and direct way. And I think he would agree. I think anyone would agree that's been up at in good health can see just what type of a unit that he runs, and it's open anytime for anybody to take a tour or meet with him to take a tour. But now with others coming, we'll just see what direction that all takes. That's up to them. As
Right.
Councilor Rodriguez says, that's up to them to be. They either can do it. If they can't, they can't. But no, I think I appreciate this. I'm happy to see something like this in place, though. But thank you, as always. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Councillor Rodriguez?
Yeah, just a quick question, Chief. Have you noticed that since the legalization of marijuana, that the use of marijuana, let's say out in the public ways, have increased pretty much stayed the same as far as your encounters, or at least are people a little more responsible in the usage of it?
At this point in time, Council, I haven't heard of any. You know, again, I'm not out on the streets, but in communicating with my staff and the guys out in the streets, you know, and I'm sure Chief Gomes is going to be able to speak on this probably a lot better than I, but we haven't noticed anything like an explosion of problems because of this. You know, I really have to say, I haven't noticed or heard of a lot of problems, really, to be honest with you. Again, law enforcement may have a different opinion, but from the fire department standpoint, I haven't seen a large uptick, no.
What about you it's mentioned here in the documents that you gave, in the document that you gave us. So what about secondhand smoke? For your guys, for instance, going into the homes where, I mean, I've gone into some homes and the places basically looks like San Francisco in some cloudy days, because you can barely see where you're going from all the smoke in the room there. How is that affecting your guys' ability to respond to, let's say, medical calls or some of the other calls?
Yeah,
it doesn't really.
It hasn't hampered us, really. You know, if we find a situation, whether it's marijuana smoke, burnt food smoke, smoke from a fireplace, let's say,
Yeah.
we have systems we can move that smoke out pretty quickly.
Okay.
Ventilate if we have to. In our case, it's a lot about making sure those smoke detectors don't go off.
So you basically see it as it hasn't been that big of an issue in terms of.
I don't believe so.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay. Thank you, Chief
You're very
Williams.
welcome. You're welcome.
What the police chief says about this.
I know. Let's see.
Thanks again. Good evening.
Good evening.
I know this is a different topic than what we were talking about earlier. And this is a relatively new industry. So with any new industries, there's going to be some growing pains. There's going to be fluctuation of laws, adjustments of laws. And then it might, at some point in time, might even be some requests from the police department or other city agencies for some kind of ordinance to assist us with these marijuana things. As the fire chief mentioned, we have a couple of growers here in the city. I see that there's been an expansion on giving out licenses for retailers. And another problem that's coming that I think it's been out of the Cannabis Control Commission, the biggest sticking point has been what's coming next, which is the delivery of marijuana. Okay? And then you're going to have delivery services throughout your community delivering marijuana. Now, medical marijuana is already being delivered. Okay? I'm talking about recreational, which is going to bring about, there's a couple of terms that I want you to familiarize yourself with, because there's going to be a cannabis courier, which if the courier license will be, for example, like Uber Eats. Okay, it'll be, they pick up the product someplace, and they basically provide the transportation to its final destination. And then there's going to be a cannabis control operator, which will be a separate license. That means that person who delivers it will also have the availability to purchase wholesale from the grower, and then sell it retail to the customer as part of the delivery package. So I want you to understand that there'll be those two different types of services that'll be going on. Now, the state still has not given an implementation date on this. They're saying it's going to be this year. I know they're already taking applications for these licenses. There will be state licenses. I don't know what kind of overview we'll have. From a home situation, protect our city, I want you to know that this is going to go on to be extra duties for our city license agents. And I'll be speaking with my counterpart on the fire department, speaking with the chief about maybe even making part of this, especially as we get going, part of code enforcement, as we get going to check locations and see that, because throughout all of this, and I won't belabor the issue, but there's gonna be a whole group of logs that they're gonna need to be kept. The fire chief already talked about security. There's mandates for securities in these cars that are doing delivery. As far as 2 people have to be in them, there has to be these logs, the vehicle must have GPS, all things of that nature. And there are also mandated reporters if they're missing, lost, or if anything gets stolen, to the community forthwith. All these final details are still being worked out in the State House, but they are telling us that it will be operational and implemented this year. So that's what we're preparing for that. So I want to make it part of the license agents for regular checks, routine checks, and also to make it part of code enforcement when we hear of any possible violations. That's where we're going with this.
Well, this is my question. I don't quite know how to phrase it. But have your officers and you noticed increase use of marijuana in automobiles and in motor vehicles?
Yes, if you speak with any officer, they'll tell you that there's, as you know, marijuana is very pungent.
Yes.
Okay, it's very. You don't have to use marijuana or ever have to have been very familiar with it to know when you smell that it's marijuana. And it's very overtaking, if you will. So a lot of our officers say that they smell a lot out of it coming out of cars that they've stopped. The difficult thing for us is that everyone has their own definition of what is legal and what is not. And although marijuana is now legal, it is with certain qualifiers. Operating under the influence is still operating under the influence. And there is no standardized test to test for marijuana use, so it's actually a higher bar for us. There's more of a preponderance of evidence that has to be garnered to be able to bring that charge. I will tell you that without having any numbers in front of me, I can clearly support the fact that we're seeing more accidents that are marijuana related. You know, we live in a society today where it became legal. You knew there was going to be an uptick. Same thing that cell phones play a much greater role in car accidents than before they were cell phones. So when you put it out there, it becomes part of the landscape, sadly. But we are seeing more of that. And counsel, to be more precise, we are seeing more cases of when people are under the influence, and we quickly rule out other things like alcohol. So it narrows right into the use of marijuana.
Thank you. Colleagues?
Well, just on that same note, Chief, I mean, you have basically the levels of testing somebody who's impaired by alcohol. If it's under 0.1, you know he's not drunk, or he or she is not drunk. And if it's above that, you know that the person is intoxicated as far as you're concerned. So what do you do in the marijuana instance where somebody might be, you know, not necessarily stoned out of their minds in the sense, but somewhat impaired? So how do you justify that in terms of removing that person from the car and saying, you know, you're borderline impaired, you can't drive?
Well, Counselor, as you mentioned with alcohol, there is a standardized test that has been court approved and court tested, and as long as the machines are calibrated, they are relatively very accurate. There is no such machine for marijuana use. The bar that's very high for the police officers is that it's not against a law to smell like marijuana. It's not against the law to be in a car that smells like marijuana. We still have to prove that the person, and it's legal to smoke marijuana. We have to prove that they did so either while driving or they're at a level where they are, at a level that they are impaired and they're operating under the influence. And that is, because it becomes strictly visual and testimony in court without something more solid. So it's harder for us to bring those charges in court, and we find much greater opposition with counsel in court on that, because it's really what's being debated in court is the eyewitness testimony of the officers and a preponderance of evidence.
So if somebody is basically, you see him weaving in and out of traffic, you can technically charge him for that, but not necessarily for being under the influence of marijuana.
If someone, for the example you just used, if they were weaving and there was obviously, there was something wrong with their driving, do you feel there was drug related? You know, but we would also have to, when you charge someone who's driving under the influence of drugs, you also have to somewhat try to narrow down the drug that you believe that they're on. And if they refuse a test, the bar is going to be very high. That does not mean that it would still bring a charge motor vehicle offenses. It would be harder for us to prove in court, but at the same time, counsel, we wouldn't let that person drive away.
Okay.
You know?
All right. Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Councilor Mendez?
Yes, thank you. So this is a very new concept, and we're still trying to figure these things out. I've also seen a very, I don't know if the police department sees this too, but a higher number of people just smoking marijuana in public and parks around children. So there has been this with the public, and then it's just something that it's really, it annoys me, but I've seen it, that it's been. If you see that in the police department, the higher increase of people just...
We do see more of it because now that it's legal, people think that it's just free reign. It's, by making it legal, it becomes socially acceptable. Not that alcohol is always good for you, but it's socially acceptable. And that's the turning point that's going on right now with marijuana. Older generations grew up without it. This newer generation is growing up with it, and it's going to become socially acceptable, and you're going to see it in every aspect of our life. I'd be trying to kid you if I told you it's not coming, and we're seeing it, and we're also seeing it being socially acceptable at much younger ages. Much younger ages. It's not uncommon to see middle school aged kids with marijuana on them, and I don't mean just, I'm talking about personal use, yeah. So.
And that would probably be some of the ordinances that we would be looking into drafting in the near future, just because I think that young children doesn't have to be around people smoking marijuana. And in the homes, they already have that situation, but then out in public, in the park and playground and things like that. So when I see it, I find it offensive, but that's just my... But as you stated, it's now becoming in person, publicly, socially accepted, and I'm still trying to...
I share your concern, but I think as we move one generation past, and some of this, these young kids as they get older, I just think it's going to be part of the landscape because there's no longer a stigma with it. It's no longer illegal, which some people say, well, if it's legal now, it can't be bad for you, and that's two different things that's going on, but we're seeing more, a lot more use with that.
And I even see people driving while smoking marijuana too, but those...
Correct.
Yes.
Correct. And again, it goes to that perception that people have that I mentioned earlier. Well, it's legal, so it's legal like a cigarette, so I can smoke a cigarette when I drive, so I can drive. The answer is no, you cannot, but it's the perception that that people have.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
I'm wondering, is legalizing marijuana playing a role in the calls that you get? Is it involved in domestic violence calls more?
I can't say that it is, counsel. I will only tell you this, that in my 35 years of experience, marijuana is a drug. marijuana's a drug. Marijuana has its drawbacks, and people can try to tell you that it doesn't. I'm not entirely drawn into the fact that it's a gateway drug, but it's a drug, and it's life-altering drug, especially over prolonged use. The only thing I can tell you, my 35 years experience as a police officer, and I've done every aspect of the job, and I've been around controlled substance for a long time. Until you get to the hardcore dealing of marijuana, the only thing that's been missing from that that is present in other drugs is violence. The use of other drugs a lot of times is associated with violence. We all lived through when crack got on the scene and all the craziness. One thing that I don't see with marijuana is the high level of personal violence, but that doesn't mean that some of the negative byproducts aren't there.
You're right.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Chief Combs.
Can I just follow up with one quick question?
Of course.
Chief, you know, we talked about the phases of marijuana, what's coming down the pipeline, the deliveries and some of these other things. You know, another term that we've been kind of grappling with is the lounges, the social clubs, and some of these other things that have been talked about in terms of opening up these.
You mean like the cultural hookah lounges?
Yes, but there's actually you know, it's going through the commission as we speak in terms of communities licensing sites for smoke lounges, basically. How do you feel about that?
I don't feel very well about it, Counselor, because people have tried to use it in the terms like a cigar bar. This is
very different.
I know that this is smoked like a cigar, but this is an altering drug. It alters you when you smoke it. It affects you. It makes your decision-making process. And I can assure you it will affect your driving home under the influence. And that's my concern. We would have to be right on top of that like licensed establishments. Because I've already heard it, Counselor, and you made a very good point. I've already heard it. Well, you know, just like we have cigar bars, nothing happens to cigar bars. Well, you can smoke a cigar all night and still drive home. Not so with marijuana, so.
Yeah, because you might, even a bar, you go to a bar to watch a ball game or something, you might have a drink or two, but you're not going to the bar to get drunk. I can't imagine somebody going to one of these lounges not to get high. So you're physically going there to get high, and it's got to be viewed a little different. So I hope that, you know, some of us are adamant about, you know, putting our foot down in this community to not to allow that functionality here in the city of Brockton. I hope you do come back and kind of help us with that whole process, because it's coming down the pipeline, but we have to make a decision here when it comes to licensing of these places.
I will. And councilors, if I may, I just want to thank you for being out in the forefront of this. There aren't many communities discussing some of this, and I'm glad that you are. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chief.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Combs. May I have a motion?
Yeah, motion to recommend favorably before the full city council.
Okay, all in favor? Thank you. Thanks, Chief.
Okay.
Okay.
Item number 3, resolved. Be it resolved that the Health Equity Task Force, established during the pandemic to provide oversight, guidance, resource coordination, and multilingual information to vulnerable constituencies in the city of Brockton, be invited to come before the City Council to give updates on their work during the pandemic, current recommendations to the City of Brockton, and any ongoing efforts. Be it also resolved that the Workers' Safety Subcommittee give a report on their recommendations to the city to keep workers safe in their workplace here in the city of Brockton. Invited to attend, Megan Bridges, Brockton City Solicitor, Eno Medusa, PhD, Executive Director of the Brockton Health Department, John Messia, Chairman of Mayor Sullivan's Health Equity Task Force, members of HETF, Workers' Safety Subcommittee, Isabel Lopez, Brockton Workers Alliance founder, Lisa Fields, Associates Legislative Director, M&A, Latita Davis, SCD, EDM, MA, Department of Public Health.
Well, good evening, and thank you all for your patience through our first two matters. At this time, to begin, I'm going to invite John Messia up to speak as he chairs the Mayor's Health Equity Task Force. Good evening.
Good evening, councilors.
Good evening, sir.
So the Health Equity Task Force was designed and created by Mayor Robert Sullivan. As the pandemic was hitting our country and our municipality, Brockton, the mayor and myself and John McGarry at the time, Dr. Herman, we had Steve Hook, and we had quite a few individuals in a confidential meeting to discuss what we could do to move Brockton forward during this pandemic. So Mayor Sullivan decided to ask me to chair the Health Equity Task Force. This was in the latest spring of the pandemic hitting. He decided we were gonna choose on which days we could actually meet to discuss how we could implement task force within the city. We chose that we would design it according to equity, which the definition of equity, the quality of being fair and impartial, we felt that was a necessity with our diverse city, and the fact that within the diverse city, there's multiple communities and key leaders, and we wanted to reach all individual communities we could, bring collaboration together within the Health Equity Task Force, and be able to achieve our mission statement. So we decided within the Health Equity Task Force and the people that volunteered to come on board, and there was quite a few, which I actually applaud a lot of the individuals from organizations, but also just themselves, to come aboard and actually roll up their sleeves and work for the city of Brockton. It's our city, your city, and I'll tell you, I really look back and I can honestly say it touches my heart that we could do the work that we did. The mission statement for the Brockton Health Equity Task Force. It was created to identify multifactorial health disparities in the city of Brockton. Through the collaboration of community partners, the task force will propose and implement solutions, advocate for vulnerable populations, influence public policy, and educate and empower citizens through a cultural, tailored lens aimed at improving the health and well-being of the community. We felt that was a fair assessment of what Brockton would need from us as key leaders to guide the city to some of the decision-making we'd need to do in order to guide the work of the task force and get the job done. As the pandemic hit and we decided to convene these meetings, we decided that it was the time to split to subcommittees. The subcommittees would identify what they would work on, they would research, review, and come back, and we would discuss what implementation and how to collaborate with departments and within the municipality and with organizations, and of course, always looking through state delegation at state initiatives. The initial subcommittees that were created were state initiative, data initiative, which would be looking at data, working through any data we could acquire. Dr. Herman was key with this at the time with Executive Director John McGarry of the Board of Health, and then Linda Cahill, who took over for John McGarry, identifying those areas and communities where we could work within those in a grassroots movement so that we could get our literature out, community outreach education being the last initial subcommittee, sending out a mailer to every residence household in the city, using the billboards in the city within our hours of operation to display almost 60,000, 59,596 delivered impressions on both billboards within the first launching. We did inserts to multiple mailers. We did signage on the BAT buses. The list goes on some of the accomplishments. But what we wanted to focus on for the creation of that task force is that each subcommittee would know what they'd be held accountable if they were to do the framework that we asked of them, and I would be there to guide them. So after announcing the task force and the recruitment of volunteered individuals along with counselors, state delegation, and department heads, and some people within the municipality departments, we set the goals, the timelines, the assignments, and we implemented strategy. After the reporting of what came back from the initial implementation, we reviewed and assessed, and then we did follow-up. Within the timeline of COVID-19's pandemic timeline, the 2020 held mandates, moratoriums. We did our outreach and education. We did PPE distribution, literature and education. We provided education and literature for social distancing and restructuring of our plan going forward into 2021. As 2021, we are starting to see the rollout of vaccines. We implemented vaccine hesitancy and trust for a subcommittee, which is in the process of being aligned right now, and Mayor Sullivan asked if I would be willing to take the point on that and to guide the Health Equity Task Force towards hesitancy and trust, along with a co-worker, to be able to guide the municipality towards reaching all the pockets of resistance and possibly educate them of why they should get vaccinated for COVID-19. We are in the process of doing the outreach and education for this next phase of the Health Equity Task Force. And this leads me to the food insecurity, that some of the goals that we accomplished. The food insecurity system was created within the mayor's office. I was chosen to guide this through the Health Equity Task Force, through the Department of Public Health, who implemented a strategy to put Partners in Health with the MAVEN system, through the Board of Health efforts to align us with my relationships with the food pantries. We decided to engage a conversation with Brewster Ambulance. Brewster decided to appoint certain individuals. Those individuals came aboard. Since the start of May of last year, we have fed over 1,050 households, approximately 6,500 individuals fed during the quarantine of COVID-19 pandemic. So these individuals would stay within their house, have adequate supplies, and be able to stay safe and recover from COVID-19. Some of the other accomplishments that we did, as I mentioned, data initiative, collecting of the recorded data to review and carry out, allocating for state funding and resources. The community outreach stands for itself. Within the communities, building those bridges needed to guide the city to an outcome that we want sooner than later, which is the end of COVID-19. We did decide to work on rental and small business initiatives. That was another later subcommittee that came. We worked with NeighborWorks to help the CDBG money help individuals for RAFT. We worked alongside Mass Hire to reach small businesses with a community outreach education effort to be able to have accessible grants and guide their small businesses to stay afloat within the municipality. Last thing we wanted to do was lose people's employment within the city. We wanted them to be able to guide this themselves with whatever money they could from these grants to be able to stay afloat. Education equity was one of the later subcommittees that came on in the timeline. Literature handouts, which Brockton Public Schools are doing all the printout for these literature handouts, are going to every household within the school system, along with every place of interest that we did from our 2020 census spreadsheet, to make sure that if you walk into a laundromat, you walk into a barber shop, you walk into any and all businesses that people do frequent, you will be able to pick up one of these literature handouts to give you the guidelines for schools. Also, a hand washing activity that was created to implement during health class that is being done as we speak, starting I believe it was when the kids went back back to school on it was before that when they started on Zoom. They were supposed to go back, they didn't. That's when the hand washing started on Zoom, so the kids were learning at home how to hand wash properly to be able to do that properly for COVID-19, and that's through the health class. And the last initiative that they decided to do was the mask creating campaign, which gets launched the end of April, is an effort with a graphic artist to teach these kids how to create their own COVID-19 mask, be enthused about doing this, and realize that COVID is the enemy, but you can do something hopeful and guide yourself to be able to express yourself in your own language, create your own mask in a keen and cool sort of way, and it's done with a music video. I think it's going to be a huge success through the art classes at the school. We're starting with the 6th and 7th grade, and then in May we will be doing the 4th and 5th grade. I applaud the school representatives, Sarah Richards. I speak to her regularly, and we're on timeline to succeed with that. And last, which we've called forward tonight on this resolve, is the Worker Safety Initiative. We have reviewed workplace complaints. They've created I'm going to let them speak on behalf of themselves, but a fact sheet along with working on tips to explore any violations, and they'll go in further detail with that. Some of the credits I'd like to acknowledge, some of these organizations go all the way down the line, and some of them are here today, but I want to not just solo out certain ones, so I'm going to leave it as, you know, the fact that there was a collaboration of many efforts, but I want to look to the individuals, the single individuals that came forward and dedicated their time that weren't part of an organization, and they were on day in and day out distributing literature, doing the hard work, rolling up their sleeve for the City of Champions in Brockton, and that's how we accomplished our goals. And at that, I do have more statistics. I don't think you need those. I can answer them by question, but that would be my presentation for you, councilors.
Thank you. Questions? Councilor Neary?
Thank you, Madam Chair. John, good evening.
Good evening, council.
As always, thank you for, taking part in something such as involved as this is, as you've done with other tasks and other things that you've been involved with over the city over so many years as well, and a great resident to Ward 3 over the years too. So appreciate that.
Thank you.
I think, I mean, you put out an awful lot there, and I speak just as myself, as a city councilor. Everyone has their opinion too, but I don't believe in any such way that this city or the people that I've talked to over the last several months in regards to this whole pandemic have been in any ways disenchanted with what we've been trying to do here in the city of Brockton. Anybody that's come into my site or have asked me any questions of the one thing they say to me, it's a tough battle to see a new mayor have to come in, new city council have to come in, new school committee, new school superintendent, and in a matter of about 90 days, everything went a different direction. And how true. And it wasn't a snowstorm. It was just, massive blow up of everything. But I can't, at this point, want to pick at any area to what were you doing and how you got it done, because I think you've got it done. I think you're still getting it done, to be truthful with you. I think the only time that I heard some people that were getting a little fidgety was when the vaccine was coming out about a month or so ago. Everybody was getting a little hinged to why weren't we, as the city of Brockton, getting ahead like some other cities and towns? People were saying to me, what are the state people doing? Where are your state people? I said, I'm not there. You got to call the mayor's office and you got to ask those questions from them. I'm getting the information that we're given, and I know some people aren't too happy at that either. But when it got rolling, as it did, I foresee that what we've been doing just in the last few months, just in the testing, just in turning the Shaw Center into whatever you want to call it, whether it be a mini Brockton hospital type of situation. People that were there to take care of the people with the vaccine, I as one, was treated just like anybody else and wanted to be treated no differently. But I can just see that, that is moving forward. And I think the greatest thing that we have concern with, and I've talked to some friends of mine that they say, oh, you went and you had a shot? I did, because it's not gonna hurt you. You had one when you were 6 years old for polio, you know? I mean, I grew up in those days when people did have polio vaccine, and you did have it, whether you wanted it or not. And some people survived, some people didn't. I went to school with a young man that he only made it to the age of 30 years old because that was the age limit back then. But still, you went and had it done. Your parents said you're having it done. And the same thing should be happening right now as well. Those are the things that even bother me a little bit is why say no? Say yes to it. You know, my second shot, yeah, it gave me 24, 36 hours of maybe not being me, but I'm me today. Well, some say I'm not, but I am. But you know what I'm saying. So I just don't want to pick at what I think what you've done, and you were asked to do by the mayor is to chair a task force, which I think you've done. I think it was established the right way with oversight and guidance and the people that you set up to work with you. I think it sounds to me like your mission statement that you put into place is working and it has worked. And we know we're not done yet. As you know, you heard me mention a couple of things just to the police chief tonight that concern me, and you know what I mean, because we're going to get those strikes of good weather, people doing what they want to do, and we're going to have to deal with that. But we know what to do with it as well, I think. So hopefully things will start to show us in that positive way. So maybe at this time next year, you know, Easter may be a little different. I'm not one that looks and says, oh yeah, 4th of July and Thanksgiving and Christmas are going to be all together. And that's not necessarily so yet. You know, they're already telling you tonight, news, you know, don't travel on vacation week unless you really, really, really have to. So that tells you there, we got to still be careful. But I just want to thank you and everyone that was involved in, you know, the work that you did.
Thank you, Council. We'll continue the efforts, like I said, hesitancy and trust going into those pockets, and that's guiding with our liaison from the state DPH is the next phase.
And I also want, you know, I thank Dr. Herman, and I know our other doctor is, I never can say his last
Dr.
name right, so
Mondes,
I leave, he knows that, I've said that to him many times, so we have an agreement that way, right, Doctor? Yeah. But, and he's done a great job as well as being, you know, since he's come on deck too, so I think that's important, very, very important as well. Thanks. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Councilor Mendez?
Yes, thank you so much for being here tonight and for the presentation. I know that when last year we're still being hit like very hard with the whole pandemic. And this just didn't become the mayor's problem. It was the city problem as a whole. And just to have these key individuals really stepping up. And I've participated in several of these meetings, and it is a lot of work and going into it, just really brainstorming what can we do to really help the community and hit those hot spots where the minority population and really how to protect themselves. So these literatures came out in several different languages and really putting that focus into that minority community, just really being able to go out there and reach out. And I saw really these people working very hard, just helping the city, helping each other, and trying to overcome together. So in these trying times, we see great things coming out of it, and it makes us stronger as a city. So if anything, this equity health task really showed that the city is a city of champions, and we can be hit with this biggest pandemic globally, being caught by surprise, not having enough PPE at the beginning, not having enough resources and funding from the state, but we just came out together and really being able to accomplish all of this, and have you and all the others that I'm looking forward to hear from them as well, coming before us tonight and really being able to show us a different picture than from we began around the same time last year when we had no idea on even how to do it. So really thank you for everyone who stepped up and putting this together, because I know it was a hard work, and it is still a hard work, but we see a light at the end of the tunnel, and that now we have a vaccine, we have people getting vaccinated, we see a progress. So this is great. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Rodriguez?
Thank you, Madam Chair. John, I think you and your committee deserve a great deal of applause and thank for the work that you've done. But I have a little bit of an issue in terms of, and I brought this up at the council meeting, and that's on the distribution of funds in this city. This city got over $800,000 from the federal government through the BRA, and not a single minority-led organization got a dime from that money, not one. You had organizations like the usual organizations here in the city recreating programs to be able to spend those funds. And you have organizations that have had a long history in this community that didn't get a dime from it. That borders on criminality in the sense. It does, because let me just roll back a little bit. I know that you know that I run the Cape Verdean Association along with some of the other individuals, and that organization has been in the city since 1977. It's the only functioning ethnic minority organization in this city that provides social services to the community. Since the pandemic hit in this city and we reopened back in May when it was okay to open through the phases that the governor came up with, we have seen over 3,000 families that have come through those doors looking for unemployment, housing help. And you know what's embarrassing? Is that we're taking all the applications for people looking for rental assistance, and we're sharing it with some of these organizations that are getting a ton of money to help these individuals out, only for these people to be put into this cycle of no response. They can't get any help because there's nobody in those organizations that speak another language. They're supposedly hiring people to speak those languages. When you've got organizations in the community that are already doing that can handle those kinds of things. But to me, it's sad that you get $800,000 in this city and you're giving funds to organizations that are going to be recreating the wheel or reinventing the wheel instead of going back to what works and give those funds, or at least share those funds with organizations that have had a reputation of doing the work in the community. So when it comes down, and I remember Councilor Nicastro came up with a list of businesses, minority businesses that had gotten some help through the CGBG funding and all that other stuff. That's not what I was talking about. Those are businesses that applied for those $10,000 grants, and they got the $10,000. I'm talking about the funding that came down to assist the community. And those funds were basically chopped up among organizations. You had organizations that have never done social services in this community applying for those funds and getting those funds and recreating a program so that they can go out and supposedly help the community out with virtual stuff. The people that I deal with every day in that organization, they're not being helped virtually. They're physically walking to the organization to get help. I know that we tell people, go ahead and apply for unemployment. Do you know how difficult it is for somebody to apply for unemployment?
I do.
If you don't speak
services, I really do.
If you don't speak the language all that well, you're not very familiar with the computer, they basically tell you to create a username, a password, and you're assuming that people actually have an idea what a computer looks like. And that's how they apply. So guess what happens? Those individuals keep coming back to that organization, because I think Dr. Montessori is here, and he can tell you that over 40% of individuals affected by COVID-19 in the city of Brockton happens to be Cape Verdeans. Did you know that?
Yes, I do know that.
Almost 50%.
Counselor,
And yet,
we go way back. You know.
and yet the organization that's dealing with those people are being basically sidelined for whatever reason that I don't quite understand. And it makes very little sense. It's almost like you served in the military and I served in the military, but it's like you've got you got the war going on in the Gulf, and you decide to, instead of sending your troops to the Gulf to help you fight the war at in the Gulf, you're sending him to Hawaii, on the opposite side of the world, basically. To me, if you've got that kind of a number within that community, to me, it means that a special attention needs to be put onto that community. Am I wrong for thinking that way?
That's your perspective. I cannot speak on behalf of the mayor. I work at the gesture of the mayor, in his office, in his staff. I was chosen as the chairman of the Health Equity Task Force. I have done, what I could with COVID relief funds, what CDBG money, and I understand what you're stating regarding the allocation of CDBG money through BRA, which is the Redevelopment Authority. I understand. Honestly, I can reflect on what you're stating, Counselor, and as I mentioned, me and you go way back. We've done a lot in the community where, especially the Cape Verdean community in the Tri-Parish, and I worked with the Cape Verdean community during census, and invaluable. I'll be honest with you, amongst other organizations, they stepped up, and I had huge success with our relationship, and I applaud that. As far as in the allocation of the funding, I did not have oversight on that. As the chair of the council, as the chair of the Health Equity Task Force, that I'm not at liberty to have oversight of those fundings. What I did have would be the access to the reimbursement of COVID relief funds, meaning if there was an insert to go out to 75,000+ pieces of mail with all 4 languages, we could get reimbursed from COVID relief funds to reimburse the municipality. I could use the COVID relief funds for signage, say, so to speak, on the BAT buses, which thankfully to our relationship, I didn't have to do, but the mailer to every single resident household on COVID, facts and stipulations on protocol that come down from the state, DPH and CDC, those we could use, and we did get reimbursable. So things like that, and my sentiments, and I don't want to go into them because I do, just like Ollie is, you roll up your sleeves, you look at the hard work you have to do, you push and use your fortitude to persevere and push forward. Like you mentioned, we were both in the military. That is something that I would do over and over and over again. Sometimes I look at the clock and I'm the last one there, and that I'm not looking at a pat on my shoulder, but I'm limited sometimes in my role, Counselor. As far as the funding, as far as state funding, that is a decision that comes into the mayor's office. Whatever reason, whoever is chosen an elected official by the people of the municipality and the city of Champions, that was Mayor Sullivan who chose me, and a lot of that money I can attest to went to Neighbor Works and Raft, who we worked alongside Rob Corley, Cynthia, and implemented whatever we could to get translational services within that agency. And at this particular time, they do have translators there. Could it be better? Most certainly. Is it better than it was? Yes. Should there have been less money to the other individuals? I'd have to analyze where those individual pieces went to places, because I know big amounts of money went to the RAFT program that was already in place, and we were looking at that. Would we have to go into a round of funding outside of CDBG funding, federal funding, to be able to bridge the gap from when we had the moratorium supposedly lifting, where the evictions would start? Would we have to bridge that gap to get us Brockton and the evictions to stop all the way till the spring? Because if we open the floodgates during the winter and the holidays, we would have been putting people on the street. Luckily, we didn't. We were down to $27,000 with the RAFT program, and then we got to the spring. I think it was early spring when we actually looked at it and said, how many more people are we going to be able to help before we run out of money? But it didn't run out. And to the commitment and the hard work of whoever we aligned with, and that's why I applaud the volunteers that came forward and guided people to these organizations, helped them fill out the process. I know we could get better, but day in and day out, we're trying to do multilingual services. Just alone today, communication liaison was filming all 4 languages to get snippets up on the website so that they can watch vaccine hesitancy on the city website by just clicking their language and be able to watch why they should take the vaccine with the same message from the state. So in all honesty, I understand your sentiments. I wish I had more oversight, but unfortunately that wasn't my particular role in the Health Equity Task Force. Thank you, Council.
I just wanted to say that, and I am a member of the Health Equity Task Force, I don't believe the task force was in the position of giving out grants or assigning people chunks of those
No, Madam
those
Chair,
funds.
the reason why I brought that up is because I saw there's a line here that says resources, distribution, and orientation. And that's why I'm bringing this stuff up, because I am telling you that we have seen over 3,000 people since May, families. You know, just in cash with Vicente's Grocery, we've given out over $100,000 worth of dollars, $50 gift cards to families. What I'm saying is the fact that I see everything being guided towards the RAF program and the neighbor works and all that other stuff when it comes to housing help. It's not touching the people that I'm dealing with on a daily basis. And that's what I'm bringing it up. Because there's millions of dollars that are being funneled through organizations to help these people out, but it's not going to what it should be going. I'm not asking for funding for the association for my own use. I'm saying funding so that I can have to give it to the people who are coming looking for some services. That's what I'm saying. Not to fund positions within that organization, but if there's some rental assistant that comes down the pipeline later on, that it be equally divided to organizations that have had a history or have a history of helping people out. I'm not saying that the mayor didn't do the right thing by putting you in that position, whatever the position that he did. I'm not arguing against the mayor one way or the other. I'm saying that $800,000 came into the city to help this community out, and a lot of these community-based organizations didn't see a dollar from it, that have a great deal of need, not funding their executive directors or whatever. I'm talking about physically. You know, why could that association get another $20,000, for instance, so we can buy more gift cards to give it to the people to use that are food insecured, for instance? That's what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about whether or not positions the mayor decided on the right way or not. But in the future, as we go into the future with more funding that come down the pipeline, let's not just put it in translation and papers, because you know what? You know very well that in the church that I serve at Edith Stein, a great number of those individuals don't go into the Facebook, don't go into the website to read and click on certain things. They rely on the information that's passed on to them in the pulpit on Sundays, information that they hear, not necessarily read. What I'm saying is, let's not put all our eggs into, and I mentioned this to Councilor Cardozo yesterday, let's not focus so much onto translating information, but have the ability to pass that information on to people. Because just because you put it on a piece of paper, it doesn't mean that it's hitting where it needs to hit. The grandmothers and the great aunts at home aren't reading stuff that we're translating because they might be illiterate in their own languages. So that doesn't mean just because I translate something, I pass it along, then I'm done. That's not the way. That's what I'm saying. We have great number of churches in this community. I'm telling you right now, Edith Stein was not given a single piece of information to share with people. I go to church and I make the announcements at church. I was never told, here's some information for you to share with your people, other than when the mayor and Dr. Mondesur and some of those other individuals that were physically doing these things ourselves are actually generating responses. But so that just because we've got translators on board, I ran translation services at Brockton Hospital for 12 years. I know what translation services are all about. What I'm saying is that we should not cross our arms and assume that things are done because we've got things translated. I'm saying it needs to go into organizations that have the eyes and the ears of these people in the community to share that information with them.
So maybe those organizations come aboard and work for the Vaccination Trust Hesitancy group and bring their leaders to that group so that they could be a part, just like the census.
The Cape Verdean community has one organization. It's not that hard to find. You found it when we were doing the census.
We're already working through DPH, Healthcare for All. They've already been assigned to work with grassroots movement. They can come aboard. I love it for that. As point person and, well, co-point person in the mayor's office, that would be wonderful. I mean, I'll do every effort, Counselor. There's sometimes I have a limited role in the Health Equity Task Force. Yes, can I make suggestions? I can. Does it say it's going to go through? Sometimes not. Right. You know, you were acting mayor. You know how it is. I'm the first person that'll roll up my sleeves, go in and make a suggestion. Sit at the table and say, this is what I inspire to do. You know, the Tri-Parish was reached out to. You know, I'm the chair of the council. I mean, sometimes it doesn't reach the ears of the individual that is listening, and they don't act upon it. Can you go back and do it? Yes. Could I use more volunteers? Yes. That's why I'll applaud any effort, any individuals that want to join. This is huge, reaching the population in pockets of resistancy that will not get vaccinated, and that's the next phase. That's why I mentioned it earlier. On your paper, which is the resolve, I assume that's the resolve there, is resources and supplies. Supplies meaning PPE, resources, food insecurity. When we got hit in 2020, people were coming out of their house to go get food. The last thing we wanted was that, or at least myself, was to bring it to the task force and say, we got to stop this. So I decided that we should partner with the pantries, things like that. It's not all attainable goals, but the ones you can lead to other goals. And yes, could we use more money in different places? I totally agree. But at this particular time, what we chose to work on with the individuals we did, that's what I presented tonight. And is there another timeline? Sure, we're in 2021, and like Councilor Ianieri said, we're not getting out of it. I mean, are we going to do better? Most certainly. But are we going to go finish in September to December? Me, if I was a betting man, which I don't gamble in any longer, I should say, I wouldn't put my chips on that. I would have to sit back and say, we're still in it for the long haul. And I don't mind, honestly, you know me. You've known me for a while that I will do every effort I can for the city of Brockton and for the good of the people in the communities.
Well, you know what? I started out by thanking you for the work that you're doing with the task force. But I had to get this stuff off my chest because I started doing it at the council meeting in the sense, and it's frustrating as hell, you know, when you're getting a ton of money into this community and it's not going where it should go. Totally. And we know where the problems are, and we need as many eyes and ears to talk about this stuff so that in the future it doesn't happen again. Because to me it's ridiculous that all that money comes down the pipeline, and yet you've got certain organizations in this community that are blamed for when things go wrong, but on the plus side, when things are plenty and wealthy, they never see a dime from anything. And that's why I wanted to share that. You know, it's videotaped, it's on tape, it's on record, that at least I share that with you. Thank you.
Understood.
Thank you.
Okay, Council.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Anyone else? Okay, Mr. Messia, at this time, I'm going to call up the members of the Subcommittee of the Health Equity Task Force on Worker Safety. And I should tell you all that City Solicitor Bridges was not able to be with us tonight. Neither was Dr. Letitia Davis, who sits on this subcommittee. But we have been joined by two additional members of it, Katie Folson and Al Vega, and I am glad for them to be here.
Thank you. I'm going to use my mask because we're still in COVID, and
Okay.
It's
Okay.
very unsafe to
I'll
see,
put mine in.
many
Okay.
folks that are not wearing the mask.
Just speak close to the microphone.
So thank you. Is that okay?
Yes.
Okay, thank you so much, Chairwoman Nicastro, and all the members of the Brockton City Council Standing Committee on Public Safety, for inviting members of the Worker Safety Initiative Subcommittee of the Brockton Health Equity Task Force to give a report on our recommendations to the City of Brockton on ways to keep workers safe in their workplaces here in Brockton. We wanted to give you some backgrounds about who we are and who is in our subcommittee and the resources we bring to the table. Our subcommittee is co-chaired by me, Isabel Lopez, and Lisa Field. I'm the founder and director of the Brockton Workers Alliance, and Lisa Field is with the Massachusetts Nurses Association. Other principal members include Dr. Tish Davis, Tolly Graham, and Al Vega, who's here with us today, from the Massachusetts Coalition for Occupational Safety and Health, and Nate Folsom, who could not be here, from the Justice Center, and also Brenda Rodriguez from the SEIU 888. Each of our organizations have a broad and deep ties to this community and its working families. The Worker Safety Initiative Subcommittee brings together health and safety experts, workers, and advocates to collaborate with local business and policymakers, providing support and resources with a focus on worker and community public safety. We believe in a three-pronged approach to helping ensure that workers and employers have the tools and understand the protocols needed to keep Brockton successfully and equitable, reopen and stay open. And these are supporting business and maintaining safe and healthy workplaces, supporting workers to identify and address barriers to safe work in the city of Brockton, including access to vaccines, assuring that adequate data is collected to help identify workers, workplaces, and industries where there is a higher risk of urgent safety and health issues, and to equip our local public health departments to meet these challenges and those that lie ahead. We held a Stop the Spread, Stay Safe, and Stay Open virtual roundtable for the business in October, where we provided an overview of the statewide reopening guidelines for business. We provided information about tools, trainings, and resources available to employers. We shared the best practice workplace health and safety practices. And we discussed with local business leaders the challenges they were facing to stay open during the pandemic and what they needed to remain open. In other accomplishments, we have a multilingual fact sheet for workers and employer resources, COVID-19 rights and regulations, best practices, and vaccine access for hard-to-reach workers on city websites. We held a small vaccine equity roundtable to support city vaccinations rollout. We are working to identify and support employers who may want to support the vaccine rollout effort to serve as a site or to refer multiple workers to available sites. We're partnering with the Brockton Neighborhood Health Center to provide input, resources, and support in the Brockton Neighborhood Health Center's efforts regarding vaccinations and overcoming vaccine hesitancy. Our members assist the Brockton Workers Alliance in creating an anonymous text line for workers in different languages to report possible safety and health violations to be triaged for referring to the local Board of Health. This is just a few things that we have done. We have helped many workers access the RAF. We have helped many workers to get unemployment and to denounce health and safety violations at workplaces. So I'm going to give, bring Lisa Field from the M&A to tell us the rest.
Thank you. We recognize these are very challenging times, and so many people are doing such good work. But we wanted to share with you what we see as some of the biggest barriers to achieving some of our goals, and then provide some possible recommendations. The lack of vaccine information and accessibility for workers and non-English speakers in Brockton are one of the problems. Also, the lack of coordination between federal, state, and local response has led to some inaccurate and stale information, as well as some frustration of workers and advocates. There have been delays in getting out timely information related to the red tape. I know government, red tape, right? But especially the approval process of any information that comes out to the community. Sometimes by the time a fact sheet goes through the approval process, some of the information is outdated and no longer relevant. An example is information about COVID-19 benefits to employers such as federal tax credits for employers to cover paid sick leave for COVID-related absences, including time to get vaccinated. Also, the lack of a system and accountability for addressing complaints against employers, including follow-up inspections and citations if needed. So we just didn't want to say what the barriers were. We also want to give some recommendations from our point of view. So we recommend the availability and accessibility of information in multiple languages on any phone lines or websites providing vaccine or other COVID information. Hours for phone lines offering help with vaccine registration need to be extended after 5 p.m. and to weekends to accommodate working people with shorter wait times. Now, we understand that the city has a website, the city has a phone line, also neighborhood health does as well. So what we're saying is across the board, workers don't understand what the difference is. Anywhere that they go, we're asking that they should be able to have information and accessibility in multiple languages after hours. We also recommend the appointment of one person who can be held accountable and would be responsible for connecting paid and volunteer support to the Shaw Center and other vaccination sites. Again, the Shaw Center sometimes is run with federal money, sometimes with state money. Again, people in the community don't understand the differences. So what we're saying, if one person could kind of coordinate between all the community groups and other organizations to be able to connect support to these vaccination sites, that would be great. We think having one person working in this capacity would be a way to streamline this portion of the federal, state, and local vaccination response. Affirmative community education and outreach through employers and unions about vaccine safety and availability, including more worksite or mobile clinics. The establishment of an accessible multilingual system for workers or consumers to make complaints to the Board of Health, and specific enforcement measures for the Board of Health to implement with non-compliant employers, including inspections and citations when needed. And also more transparency on additional funds being made available to the city and where they are being used and can be used. We believe it's important that our city, its advocates, and policymakers should be on the same page, because at the end of the day, we all want to see the same thing: a safe, vaccinated, and open Brockton for all. Thank you. We're happy to expand on anything, so if you have any questions, Isabel and Elle can help me. Colleagues?
Hi, thank you so much for being here tonight. And again, I want to reinstate what I said to Missy, that it's just been nice just having a group of people from the community really helping out the city and accomplish and do all these great things. As to the recommendations, how are you seeing them being implemented and being into taking an effect and taking a life? How has it been, that process from, because I know that after there's a process that goes through the mayor's office. Can you just elaborate on that and how is that really being implemented?
I forgot to mention, I want to put out two examples before we can answer your questions. But for example, as the Worker Center, we have been working with a local bakery, with many workers have to work there with COVID-19 and afraid to say that they cannot stay home because they're undocumented and they cannot get paid, and the employer is not going to pay them because they are afraid to speak out. So we have tried to, through the process, to work together to address this issue with the Board of Health, and we found that the city doesn't have, like Lisa said, they don't have a mechanism, a system, how to address these issues. Therefore, we had many workers that came and got sick because the employer was not doing what they're supposed to do. And so we wanted to see some positive outcome out of this situation. The second thing is that we have a lot of volunteers speaking many different languages across the city to let people know, to inform people on this vaccine issue, on the vaccine access, And, we want to make sure that, our communities are being respected and the languages are spoken everywhere they go. The health center only you know, you have to speak, you have to call them and spend like 20 minutes to get someone. And we wanted the whole access to be in many different languages because people deserve that. And so I wanted to put these examples before, you know, we come to you because we have these recommendations. We have expressed what is it that the city needs and the residents and every worker and employers need. And I think that we need to work towards that. I want to leave to Lisa on Al.
Al.
Yeah, I think, again, my name is Al Vega. I'm with the Massachusetts Coalition for Occupational Safety and Health. And I can't believe it's been a year since we've kind of, were asked to join this task force. Isabel reached out to our organization. We've, had a long time relationship. And I think, what I think has been difficult is that at the beginning of the pandemic, I think we were coming in with a lot of different ideas, understanding the challenges, and I think, Lisa kind of already went over what some of those barriers were, and I think that's kind of the things that we know that right now there's been a lot of focus on the vaccine efforts, and so you heard one of our recommendations was still to keep in mind that there is probably still going to be people wondering about health and safety issues in the workplace, whether that be workers or consumers. And so we just wanted to be able to kind of figure out a year later, is there something that we can do that feels a little bit more public and structured so that people are aware of when these issues come up, that there is an avenue to get them remedied. And I think that's some of the frustrations that Isabel just mentioned. It just feels like we haven't had that opportunity to really streamline anything to feel like we're adequately responding to all the kinds of concerns that she's hearing and other organizations of ours that are also kind of hearing from different industries. So I think that's been, I don't want to kind of leave this here that's been the only thing. As you can tell from what John said, there's been so much positive work that has come out of this task force, and I know that it wouldn't have been possible if it wasn't for efforts to kind of keep us moving along, even when there were frustrating times and challenges. And so I'm hoping that this is just an opportunity for us to kind of figure out, are there additional things that we as a collective can be doing to try to remedy some of these challenges that have unfortunately been present, some of them since a year ago, that I think, we've done some things, but I feel like there's a lot more that we can be doing, and being able to streamline, I think all of those efforts will probably help us kind of fill the types of gaps that we mentioned in our remarks.
Thank you.
And I'll just add, it's been so overwhelming. I mean, this has been the pandemic of the century, and I think that Brockton's done such a great job in trying to navigate that, bringing people to the table. And the one thing I think we all can agree on is that we've had a spot at the table to bring up concerns and to be able to address it. It's just there's so much work to do. And so again, we don't want to harp on what, we've accomplished so much, but we have to address what the barriers are so we can overcome them and learn the lessons and move forward.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
No, thank you so much. And I appreciate Isabel mentioning the undocumented workers in a workplace, because I do know that that is a fact. And they don't really get the benefits and the help and assistance, so it's so much harder for them. So they're not going to go to their employers and tell the employers that even if they have a flu, if they have a cold, because they're just so afraid that they're going to be sent home and they're not going to get paid, and they can't qualify for any government assistance. So that is a challenge, and our city does have a lot of these residents that's part of our community. So that is a reality, and I do believe that is also a reason why we were hit so hard with the pandemic and we were in the red, really for the simple reason that the cluster of our population is really, they have to work day in and day out, and they are used in going to work despite being sick, and because they have to put food on their table. So it's a challenge, and I really appreciate you all recognizing that need and trying to educate the employer that even though they're not required by law, but they should really encourage that employees to stay home and not come to work sick, and pay them, because if they're not getting paid, they're not staying home, they're going to work. So thank you, really, thank you so much for that. I appreciate it.
Counselors? No? Dennis?
I just want to respond to some of the stuff. The state has regulations and guidelines for employers to follow on this issue, and the workers are entitled to get paid sick time, even to go and get the vaccines.
Would that be through the workers' comp that they could file a claim if they are sick, so that way they could get paid?
There is another, if workers get sick, it used to be, there was another provision in our lawyer, who's, we have put together all these resources, but there was a CARES Act before. Now, after January 1st, there's new laws that were passed, but everybody qualified and everybody deserves to get paid for getting sick with COVID through the, sick time. And also employers need to know that. And it's unfair that many people in our communities, because they don't speak the languages, they have to take a lot from the employers and local employers, which is sad.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you so much. At this time, I'm going to ask Dr. Mondesir to come up.
We're happy to send the recommendations electronically to you.
That would be swell, and I can distribute it.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Mondesir, thank you so much for being here this evening at this late hour. I do very much appreciate it. And I know you've got the weight of the community on your shoulders and treating them for COVID and all that and vaccines. You heard what the people from the Workers' Subcommittee had to say tonight. How can we help them? Their concerns are our concerns.
Well, thank you, Councillor, and it's a pleasure to be here this evening as well, because if you're here, that means you're working, and so therefore, even if the hours are long, but we are working for the people. If I could be to the point, and maybe I can address ancillary issues as time allows or as necessary. The Board of Health has, if you look at COVID and the responsibilities that we have, everything seems to focus on COVID. But the Board of Health has the entire city and almost every individual to look after if they have need. They need maybe COVID for someone. They need, could be another infection for someone else. As I came in on September 1st, I would say almost 80% of the time of the resources are channeled towards COVID. And there are many other issues that haven't been addressed. When it comes to compensation or looking how employees and employers interact, there's a very fine line for the health department. And that line has strictly covers health issues, not salary, not compensation, because this is not a jurisdiction for the health department. That would be something that the law department deals with, labor relations deals with. The Board of Health cannot help in that. What the Board of Health is responsible for is to see how to mitigate the spread of the virus, which we do. How do we do that? Now, my colleagues over here, they do a good work finding where there is a complaint and bring it to the attention of the Board of Health. For instance, I have in my hand here one that was brought to our attention on December 21st, 2020. On December 22nd, 2020, within 24 hours, that case was addressed. One of my inspectors went to that place, which is a bakery on Montello. It's called Montello's Bakery. And based on the investigation of the inspector, it was found that the bakery did not act recklessly. With COVID, there is a fine line also in terms of how far you can follow a case, because the virus has a very short lifespan when it infects someone. Basically, we look at a window of 14 days. Within that period, the person has to be, anyone who is infected needs to either be isolated or quarantined. The place where the person has used needs to be sanitized, disinfected, and then used within the 24 hours or so. So beyond that, there is nothing more one can do, I mean, the Board of Health can do for these particular incidences. If someone is sent home by an employer without a salary or not being paid, not being given consideration, that's something totally out of the Board of Health hand. Our part is to control infection, is infection control. Once we do that, the place is sanitized, it's clean, we cannot do more. That's not the jurisdiction, it is beyond the jurisdiction of the Board of Health. With respect to vaccination, now we all know that the Board of Health doesn't have the control over that. And at one point, I was really wondering, my goodness, are we going to have vaccines? Because we could not set up vaccination sites or clinics because we had to wait until DPH, Department of Public Health, allocates this X number of vaccines for us and said, okay, this is what we have. This is what I'm going to give you. Because you cannot line up people for vaccination if you don't know how many you have to start with. And so therefore, we had to go at the mercy of DPH until probably a month ago, when DPH delegates a liaison to work with the city. And at that point, the city has been a recipient also of receiving vaccines. So that makes Brockton one of the 20 municipalities that are considered disparity cities with respect to allocations of vaccine and help. And so therefore, at this point, I would say that we are in a very, very good position to help with vaccines. But with respect to the Shaw Center, we are out of that.
Yeah.
Because right now we're looking at the low-rises, we're looking at churches, we're looking at community centers to see how we can get vaccine delivered. In fact, I think Honorable Councilor Rodriguez mentioned
Churches.
Just this morning, I was on the phone with Father Michael. I believe that that's a good relationship. There is a good relationship between Councilor Rodriguez and that priest. And so probably as early as next week, we may have a clinic there. On Friday, we're having a clinic at another church there, right at 65 West Elm Street. So basically, we don't have much jurisdiction at what takes place at the Shaw Center. As everyone knows, the Brockton Neighborhood Health Center has been designated by the federal government to receive additional money from the federal government, as well as additional vaccines, as well as National Guards to help. So the Board of Health, in a way, is out of that picture for the most part. And so therefore, what we do with the resources that we have, we try to expand. By the way, I have to say, I mean, not to be disrespectful, not to say anything to alarm anyone here. The Board of Health that is there right now, for the size of the city, for the size of the demographic, is under resources, is underfunded. There isn't enough people to do their work. Many times I come 6 a.m. in the morning, and this is not an unusual day for me to still be here, because I took the job and I carry it with me on my shoulders. And so therefore, I do the best I can with the resources I am given to do it. And I'll take the questions if there is any for me.
Thank you. Questions, councilors? No?
No, as the doctor said, he called me a while ago in terms of working with the Catholic Church here in the city of Brockton, and we, with Father Michael, we came up with the idea of putting a site at Christ the King, yes, which is on the opposite side of the city in the sense. So I think it logistically makes sense, and also for the fact that the three churches in this community, the largest churches in the city of Brockton are these Catholic churches, will have the ability to get their parishioners involved and also make those sites available for the general community as we move forward with whatever the next phase might be. So, and this is what I was saying before, that we need to get the churches involved in this whole thing. I was just looking at the Palm Sunday, for instance, the Mass at Edith Stein, the 1 o'clock Mass that basically is live streamed. It had 21,000 contacts and over 10,000 views. So if you want to share information in this community, to me, it would make sense. I mean, you don't have to go to MIT or Harvard to figure this stuff out. You got to go after where people are watching and listening. So those churches or those organizations, if you want that information to get out there, that's where you need to pass it. And announcements are made at the end of Mass to share with the community. If you want truly to get hold of the people in the community, that's what you got to go. You can't sit here and wait for them to come to you, because them are volunteers too. Them are working Monday through Friday in hours that they might not be able to go to a meeting, and them might be working on weekends as well. So sometimes we need to go to them versus waiting for them to come to us. And that's what I'm trying to say, that it's not just about translating things, because I notice that sometimes we put way too much emphasis on that, but it's physically communicating with that community, and let those that are connected within those communities do the communicating for us. Because again, just by putting it on paper or putting it on a website or putting it on Facebook or what, that doesn't mean it's going to touch the grandmothers and the great aunts and whatever that don't have a phone or read and write. But they listen to those priests, they listen to the pastors at the pulpits to share that information with their population, and that information will go to where it needs to go. And that's what we need to start doing. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
I do, Madam Chair, if I might. Doctor, I appreciate you being here this evening as well, and also taking time to talk with us. Not to hold this so we're not here much later, but it was my understanding when I heard you just in conclusion indicating that you're here sometimes at 6 o'clock in the morning. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes, many times I come because I have emails. Mm-hmm. I have probably 10 to 15 Zoom meetings without exaggerations. Mm-hmm. So those meetings, some of them last, the shortest is 15 minutes. The longest is over an hour. Mm-hmm. I have a staff to manage. I have certain calls to make to DPH. Mm-hmm. For instance, today I personally had to trace a passenger I mean passenger because it's someone who get tested on Monday, but had a book a flight to travel. Now, I have 2 nurses for the entire department. They were at a clinic. So when Brockton neighborhood called me to say, here's the situation. It's a sensitive matter. I cannot call an inspector to do this for me. I cannot call my administrative assistant to do this because this is really sensitive, a sensitive file. So I took it. I started calling American Airlines. And every time I called, I hit a wall, wait on the phone for 15, 20 minutes waiting. They'll come to you, they'll come to you. So I called TSA. TSA would not connect me with any body there. I said, I identified myself where I'm calling from. So they connect me with the state trooper at the airport. The state trooper wouldn't lead me. He said, well, unfortunately, I don't have the connection. I'll walk the information to American Airlines for you. By the time the state trooper gave the information, yes, it did reach American Airlines. But I had no opportunity whatsoever to actually prevent this. In fact, the information came to me a little bit late also. So all these issues, the Board of Health deals with them, but I don't think too many people know what exactly goes on in there. And so there is much that is expected, more is expected, and we try to deal with it. So that is why I give you a long-winded answer. Yes, I come at 6 o'clock because there are things that I don't have to do during the regular 8 hours. By the way, the job was advertised from 8:30 to 4:30. But during my interview, it was says, oh, okay, well, it's a head department. It's 24/7. So
Well, by the time connected, I would have been waiting for lunch, I'll tell you that right now. But I do want to mention something to you because I think it's important enough. And you know, for whatever reason, over all the years I've sat here I'm on my 18th year as a city councilor and many years as a school committee member, but sitting here in City Hall, and it's been something that we've always had to deal with, and it's the lack of not having enough people within the Board of Health Department, to be truthful with you. It was something that, you know, I listened to for many years from the late Louis Tartaglia and all that he had to do and try to get the job done. And when we gave money for a position, we'd end up taking the money away because we put it somewhere else or something else, or a contract had to be, whatever, you know. My advice to you, and I think, you know, I would hope that during this budget process, we're able to do something, you know, within that department to make it flourish a little bit more. I mean, we've just showed ourselves that we're capable of doing, no doubt, and I know you and I conversed a couple of times when I was up, and I appreciate, you know, when I had my vaccines, I had it through the Board of Health Department and taken care of like any other, you know, resident of the city. But I have to say, what and how it all worked was tremendous as far as I'm concerned, you know, and I've never been afraid of a needle. But anyhow, I think I think we have to start to put into play that, you know, how do we know that this may not happen again sometime soon? We don't know this. We're in the dust. We really are. You know, I don't know. Do I get a vaccine 6 weeks or 6 months or a year and a half from now? I don't know that now. I don't know what my body might say. And you don't have that answer for me either. Then you're probably going to say, sit tight, I'll help you connect. But, you know, at that point, but you know what I'm saying. I just want to say, you know, I hope that when you're preparing your budget, which you probably are doing so for the next fiscal year, that you have the mayor, and I would hope that, and I would think that he would, as well as our CFO, that we need to take a look at, you know, the department, and if we're in a need for nurses, we need to do something. We really, really do. And we as a council need to take a look at it as well, and not just brush it off and say, well, there might be enough there for another position at some time, we don't know. And we can't, because it's been long overdue. I mean, we even as counselors rely on the health department for enforcement. The people do, no doubt. I mean, and they do a tremendous job, the people that are out there doing what we need done too, but there's so much to be done. And, you know, I don't like to see, as the man that's in charge right now, I don't like to see you have to be trapped in something else that somebody else could have been, you know, doing some work on. So just, you know, keep that in mind. I'll show you whatever support I can when the budget comes before us. And I think that, I'm not gonna speak for my other colleagues, but I think they would probably come up the same way and, you know, do whatever we can to help to get that department with a little bit more growth. It's well overdue. It really is. Well, I thank you, Doctor, for all that you're doing right now
Thank you for your
during this
kind words,
difficult
Counselor.
time, really.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr.
Thank
Montessori.
everybody. Thank you.
Isabel, wait for me. Oh, does anyone have anything else? If not, may I have a motion?
Motion to recommend favorably to the
Second.
council.
Thank you. All in favor? Thank you.
Thank
Shall we adjourn this meeting?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.